The year is 306 BC, and following his victory at Salamis, Antigonid control in the eastern Mediterranean is now supreme. Yet almost immediately, new obstacles would arise for this newfound dominance. No more so than on a small island in the South Aegean, the island of Rhodes. News of Demetrius' victory reached Antigonus in Syria. He realised his power in the eastern Mediterranean was now unmatched. So, Antigonus made an audacious proclamation to his Macedonians, assuming the title of king and naming his son Demetrius both as joint king and successor. With the death of Alexander the Great's last direct heir back in 309 BC, Antigonus was making a bold statement to his rivals. The Antigonids, he implied, were now the rightful heirs to his empire. Yet his rivals had no intention of accepting this. Very soon, Ptolemy, Cassander, Lysimachus and Seleucus all made similar proclamations, accepting their own regal status. However, following the Cyprus debacle, Ptolemy's power was a shadow of its former self. Antigonus knew that this was his opportunity to invade Egypt. Gathering a grand army of almost 90,000 men, Antigonus, who was now nearly 80 years old, advanced towards Egypt. Adjacent to his father's army, Demetrius commanded the Antigonid fleet along the coast. Having passed his frontier at Gaza, Antigonus attempted a quick march towards the Nile Delta. Yet the march was difficult, with his army having to traverse a waterless desert and under constant threat from hostile Nabatean raiders. Attrition was endured, but soon enough the army reached the most eastern branch of the Nile Delta, near Pelusium. Their relief would be short-lived. Across the river, Ptolemy's army were entrenched and fully prepared to thwart any attempt to cross. Yet Antigonus had a plan. He ordered Demetrius to lead the fleet and attempt a landing on the nearby coast, thereby creating a bridgehead for his forces. Demetrius duly obeyed and prepared his best troops for the task. First at Pseudostonom and then at Phatniticum, the young Antigonid attempted to breach Ptolemy's defences, but to no avail. Ptolemy's defenders resisted formidably, and Demetrius was forced to return to his father. Antigonus now considered what to do next. His attempt to divert Ptolemy's defences had failed, and he knew that any frontal crossing had no guarantee of victory. He only had to look back at the fate of Perdiccas to realise that. Not wanting to take the risk, Antigonus gathered his army and ordered a retreat. The invasion was abandoned. Ptolemy had survived once again. At the beginning of 305 BC, Antigonus returned to Antigonia. But that did not mean the end of Antigonid expansion. Under the command of Demetrius, a new campaign was soon launched, this time against a very different foe, the island of Rhodes. Previously, the Rhodians had refused to aid the Antigonid cause, claiming neutrality. Yet their friendly relations to Ptolemy were well known. And so, worried that the Rhodians could act against him in the future, and seeing their fleet as the last stumbling block before uncontested Antigonid naval supremacy in the eastern Mediterranean, Antigonus ordered Demetrius to take the island. At Lorima, a large Antigonid force was gathered for the expedition. Its navy would consist of 200 warships, many of which were equipped with artillery. It also had 170 transport and supply ships to carry a 40,000-strong land force. Demetrius also enlisted the aid of a small group of pirates, men who were skilled raiders and able sailors. And he also brought with him a large amount of siege equipment and provisions. He was experienced and well prepared for a siege. With this huge armada, Demetrius set sail for Rhodes, landing his army near its namesake capital. He placed his camp on a plain to the southwest of the city, while his navy set up a blockade of the Rhodian harbour. Fortifying his position, Demetrius dispatched his pirates to raid and pillage the island, much to the dismay of the trapped Rhodians. After realizing that any attempts to negotiate were fruitless, the 7,000-strong Rhodian garrison readied the defences. The siege had begun. The first engagement soon occurred. Hoping to surprise the blockaders, 3 Rhodian vessels sailed out from the harbour, catching Demetrius' navy off guard and sinking many supply ships before returning to Rhodes. First blood to the Rhodians. Undeterred, Demetrius began preparations for an attack on the Rhodian harbour. He placed 2 large penthouses on top of 2 strapped-together cargo ships, with ballistae and catapults stationed inside the raised platforms, designed to batter the Rhodian defences. At the same time, Demetrius constructed 2 4-storey-high siege towers, once again superbly mounted on cargo ships. He also filled many of his smaller ships with specialised Cretan archers and artillery. The Rhodians, in response, placed artillery around the harbour. They placed them on their ships, on the wall, and on the mole that protruded from the harbour. With his preparations complete, Demetrius commenced the assault. At night, he landed a small force of men at the farthest end of the mole, capturing it and creating a bridgehead for his forces, some 500 feet from the city wall. He placed 400 men to defend this bridgehead. Early the next day, Demetrius had his amphibious siege engines towed into the harbour. Heavy catapult, ballista and archer fire were exchanged on either side, and great damage was inflicted on the Rhodian defences. Yet eventually, Demetrius sounded the retreat. Seeing the engines withdrawing, the Rhodians attempted to destroy them with fire ships. But the pursuit failed, and the ships were engulfed harmlessly. A second attack on the Rhodian harbour soon followed. Once again, Demetrius' siege engines were towed inside, and his artillery battered the Rhodian fortifications, with a portion of Demetrius' troops managing to gain control of a section of the Rhodian defences. At the same time, Demetrius' army on land scaled ladders at various locations along the city walls. Heavy fighting ensued on multiple fronts. Casualties were high on either side, but eventually the Rhodians emerged victorious, and Demetrius' army withdrew. Despite these failed assaults, Demetrius remained determined to capture the harbour. As soon as his ships were repaired, he ordered a third assault. And this time, Demetrius had a plan he believed could not fail. He ordered his lighter ships, manned with archers, to rain fire arrows on the opposing Rhodian vessels to set them alight. In the meantime, 3 of his formidable amphibious siege engines bombarded the harbour defences, the ballistae targeting the wall itself, and the catapults aiming at the defenders on the ramparts. It was a terrifying assault, and soon the Rhodian defences began to waver. The Rhodians were desperate. Yet despite heavy arrow fire, their sailors managed to extinguish the fires on their ships, and seeing the perilous situation, they proposed a desperate strategy. 3 of their most agile ships were manned by the best Rhodian sailors and were sent through heavy fire right towards Demetrius' siege engines and rammed them. This suicide attack managed to destroy 2 of these formidable engines. Yet soon, the Rhodian ships were surrounded and destroyed, while the 3rd engine escaped. Yet in this daring act, the Rhodians had saved the harbour from almost certain capture. Demetrius once again was forced to retreat. Not long after, a great storm occurred off the Rhodian coastline. Any attempts to launch a new attack were temporarily thwarted. The Rhodians sensed an opportunity. The far end of the mole was still in Demetrius's hands, but now it was unable to be aided by the fleet. Launching a wave of attacks, the Rhodians soon overwhelmed the small outpost. More bad news was to follow for Demetrius. As the storm subsided, reinforcements amounting to 650 troops sent from Ptolemy managed to sneak into the harbour, reinforcing the jubilant Rhodians. Demetrius's attempts to take the harbour had backfired completely, and in the beginning of 304 BC, he changed his tactics, turning his attention to a land assault. To that end, he constructed another great siege tower, a Helepolis. This siege tower was even bigger than his previous one at Salamis, and he had learned from his past mistakes, placing iron plates over the wooden frame to prevent it from catching fire. Indeed, so large and heavily fortified was this tower that 3,400 men were needed to move it. It was then that Demetrius earned the nickname Polliorcetes, meaning the besieger of cities. Alarmed, the Rhodians began constructing a secondary wall. With their harbour also now free from constant assault, Rhodian ships made frequent sallies, hoping to disrupt the enemy's supplies. In the meantime, Demetrius had ordered sappers to undermine the Rhodian walls. Yet the Rhodians, learning of this threat, constructed tunnels of their own, and a desperate fight ensued underground. Yet eventually, with aid from the Helepolis, manned with numerous ballistae and catapults, and his other artillery, a breach was created in the Rhodian wall, and the Rhodian forces retreated. Yet to Demetrius's dismay, his forces broke through only to see a hastily completed second wall now standing in their way. Demetrius was now running out of patience. A daring assault was needed. Picking his best men for the task and placing them under the command of his most experienced general, Alcimus, Demetrius ordered a quick night assault on the city. That night, Alcimus led his force into the city and achieved success at first. His force quickly broke through the second wall's defences and reached as far as the theatre. But there, a vicious fight ensued between the attackers and the Rhodian defenders. Many fell on either side, but eventually the Rhodians, fighting zealously for their homeland, overcame Demetrius's forces. Of the 1,500 men that had reached the theatre, all were either captured or killed, among them Alcimus. The assault had failed, and Demetrius returned to the siege. However, news now reached him that his father had ordered him to break off the siege. The year-long siege was lifted. Demetrius reached an agreement with the Rhodians and sailed away. For the Rhodians, it was their finest hour. They had successfully defended against the superpower of the time. In honour of their achievement, they ordered the construction of a monument that would go down in history as one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, the Colossus of Rhodes. As for Demetrius, he was needed in Greece. Cassander had once again become a threat. Yet little did he know that the great climax to the Wars of the Successors was fast approaching. We will cover this great climax in the next episode of this series, so subscribe and press the alarm bell to keep notified. Our videos are made possible by our brilliant patrons over at Patreon and YouTube sponsors. Visit our Patreon or press the sponsorship button to learn more about the perks we are offering. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.